Hello, everybody, and welcome to Climate and Cuisine, a podcast of Climate Diet. My name is Jane DeMarines, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Diet and the host of Climate and Cuisine. And we are thrilled today to have with us Michael Grunwald, an award-winning journalist and author of We Are Eating the Earth. I have to show you this book and hope that you'll buy it. It's the most important book, I think, for this decade, if not the century. Wow. It's a sweeping and urgent look at how our global diet is reshaping the planet. Through deep reporting and powerful storytelling, Michael exposes how agriculture, especially industrial meat production, is driving deforestation, biodiversity collapse, and some of the most significant greenhouse gas emissions on Earth. The experts that I talk to say 75% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from both the food grown for animals, mostly cattle, and then what they eat and their emissions on their own, which methane is a big one. His book arrives at an important time. We have record temperatures around the globe, increasingly fierce storms, rivers of rain drowning entire cities around the world. My daughter lives in Tampa, and she had 8 friends lose their houses in the last hurricane, either lose them or they were made unusable, unlivable. So I do think this is one of the most important books in the world at this time. So Michael, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. Those are incredibly kind words, and I'm really touched and honored that you would say those things.
Well, so let's get to some questions. Your book, We Are Eating the Earth, makes the case that our food system is the single most destructive force on the planet. What was the moment or piece of evidence that crystallized that realization for you?
Well, for me, I tend to write about kind of slightly complicated, but not too complicated issues that are sort of at the intersection of really important and really interesting and really neglected. And there's usually one big, dumb, Captain Obvious idea behind the stuff I dig into. And so this was certainly, food, agriculture, climate is both important and neglected and interesting. But my big, dumb idea was basically, those of us who live in cities and suburbs, we can look out the airplane window and see all those rectangles and circles, and we know that there's a lot of agriculture out there. But my idea was that there is a lot of agriculture out there, that it's just extraordinary, that our cities and suburbs only cover about 1% of the land on Earth, but our farms and pastures already cover nearly 40%. And we are losing a soccer field worth of tropical forest every 6 seconds. And that agriculture now covers a landmass that's like all of Asia plus all of Europe. And that's just extraordinary, the way our natural planet is becoming an agricultural planet. And I figured, there were 1,000 books about energy and the planet. I thought I'd do one about food.
Well, we thank you for that. You describe how agriculture, especially meat production, is driving the massive deforestation. The Washington Post has done some articles on this as well. What surprised you the most about the scale and speed, and you did reference something here, of forest loss tied to human diets?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, it's unfortunate because meat is delicious and, humans ate 450 million tons of it last year. But a lot of this eating the earth problem is an eating meat problem, right?
Absolutely.
More than three, I mentioned that 2 of every 5 acres of land on earth are now agricultural. Well, 3 of every 4 of those acres are either pastures or they are growing crops for animals to eat before we eat them. And, as you know, it's sort of a lot more efficient to eat plants than to eat animals that eat plants. You have to feed 9 calories worth of plants to a chicken to get 1 calorie worth of meat, because you have to support all of that, the beaks and the feathers and the clucking and the breathing. And then it turns out, this was a real shock to me. I mean, it's embarrassing. I think you know this, but I didn't, that cattle use 10 times as much land and generate 10 times as many emissions as poultry or pork. And that that led me to cut beef and lamb out of my diet. But I realized that this is just a gigantic issue. In the United States, we use about half of our agricultural land to grow beef that provides about 3% of our calories. They're just spectacularly inefficient converters of their feed into our food. So it's not just that beef is by far the leading driver of Amazon deforestation. It really is this notion that when you eat a burger, you're not just eating a cow, you're eating macaws and jaguars, you're eating the Amazon, you're eating the earth.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. And I think in your book, you had references to the Netherlands and the fact that they're more pig farmers than cattle farmers. They certainly have way less land than us. But I was just jumping back into it. As I said to you, I read it a while ago, and so I was trying to reread some sections of it. But do you have anything to add about that? Because I thought that was an interesting point, that they made a conscious decision to stay away, that's what it seemed. Again, I was taking a
Well,
quick read on that.
yeah, I mean the country that I really focus on a lot because I try not to be a Debbie Downer about these things, and it's Denmark that really passed the
Oh, yeah,
right. They passed
yeah,
the kind of Mike Grunwald Agricultural Reform Act of 2025, and so first of all, they're investing in, they're trying to do education about plant forward eating. They're investing in alternative proteins, right? The fake meat made out of, whether it's plants or, out of animal cells or mycelium and other fungi. So they're pushing that. But there was a lot of, there were a lot of the environmentalists there said like, hey, agriculture is becoming such a big problem. We need to, they have a huge dairy industry and pork industry, and they said, well, let's just shrink it so we have fewer cows and fewer pigs and less manure. And to their credit, I believe what the government did, and there was bipartisan, I guess in Denmark it's tripartisan agreement, and the enviros eventually went along, and so did the agricultural industry. Is they said, no, we are not. We have an incredibly efficient pork and dairy industry. And if we just shut it down here, we're just going to outsource deforestation and pollution to the
right,
developing world. Instead, we're going to help them make even more food, but do it with less mess. And we're going to sort of test drive some of these agricultural technologies that can be more climate friendly, whether it's, feed additives that help cattle burp less methane, or genetically engineered crops that can be drought tolerant or higher yielding, so you don't need as much land to make the same amount of food. And at the same time, they're also going to turn 1 million acres of sort of marginal farmland back to nature, and they're going to tax agricultural emissions. So they're really doing all the things. And I know it's Denmark, right? They're the model nation. They're happy, they're healthy.
yeah, yeah.
Everybody there is beautiful. But I do think it is a sign of hope. It shows that it can be done, and it's hard. But if it were easy, somebody would have done it already.
Yeah, we have some friends that just went there for a summer vacation and said they want to move there.
Yeah, it's nice.
They said it was so idyllic.
Yeah.
But
I saw Borgen. I saw, you see it on Netflix. I mean, even the politicians were kind of nice.
you've kind of answered this, but it's important, I think, to underline a lot of the key points from your book. So you write about the hidden environmental cost of everyday foods. So which foods do you think Americans most underestimate in terms of their climate impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is, it's meat generally and beef and lamb specifically.
Okay,
Those are really the baddies. Dairy's bad too because cattle really are, the problem. But cattle do, cows make milk like 2 or 3 times a day, and they only make beef like once in their lifetime. So beef is really the spectacularly inefficient one. And I think we should point out that in the United States, we now per capita eat a third less beef than we did 50 years ago. And it's not because we decided we really cared about the planet and about the climate. It's because chicken got cheap. But again, it shows that change is possible and change can happen. The average American still eats the equivalent of 3 burgers a week. And if we cut that to 2 burgers, we would save a Massachusetts worth of land every year. So again, change is hard, but change is possible. And again, if you like, this is one reason that even though the Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger have not been, they've definitely had their struggles. The cow
Right.
is a pretty
Right.
mature, the cow is a pretty mature technology, and fake meat isn't. So if it gets better and cheaper and healthier, I think you could imagine that as a way for Americans like me who absolutely love the taste of beef to try to eat a little less. We still eat 4 times the global average, so there's still plenty of room for improvement.
I think some of the, just to tie into what you said about the struggles that the plant burgers have had recently, uh, frankly, I've been a vegetarian or a vegan for more than 2 decades, 20, 25
Good
years
for
with
you.
my husband, and I have 2 daughters that are vegans. And the one daughter is the reason we became vegan. She gave us the China study. So once we read that, it was like, no way am I, no way are we eating. We also had some health issues that were very serious. So it related to that as also impetus to change what we ate. But what I was going to say is, I think as a vegan, you also begin to experiment more, and those burgers are the first place you go to kind of eat because they're quick and you're working, and you like burgers, right? So they taste the same taste tests that Burger King showed people couldn't tell the difference between the plants and the real. Um, but I think you start experimenting with lentils and all the other things, beans and chili. There's so many dishes. My organization is putting out, we put out recipes every Friday, plant-based recipes, and they are the most popular thing we do. They have the biggest readership, and then we're doing a cookbook. So I think people move on from just the burgers, and it's not necessarily we have fewer, not that you said this, but fewer plant-based eaters. I think we just have people maybe growing in their sophistication of things you can eat.
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think it's awesome what you're doing. I mean, I really do, and I think that's great. And the more, I've started eating more lentils, and I like them, and I think, and the more people discover that there are, plant-based proteins, whether they're, sculpted into a burger or not, I think that's awesome. But I also think that realistically, like people love meat.
Yeah.
Most people do. And unfortunately, Jane, you're not really the target audience. You already have a very climate friendly diet. The problem is that, the other 8 billion people on Earth really don't. And as you know, like in China and in India, even in India and in much of the developing world, as people are getting less poor, and the first, which is
Yeah.
awesome. And the first thing human beings tend to do when they start getting less poor is they
Yeah.
start eating more meat. There are
They want
still like
meat.
6
Yeah.
billion people on Earth who eat practically no meat. And that's actually really unfair. It's unjust. Most of them are not doing it by choice. So I do think, it's coming. We're expected to eat as a species 70% more meat by 2050. And get the, at least so far, the track record of people yelling that meat is murder or shaming carnivores or even educating people about about what goes on in factory farms and how red meat is bad for your health. It doesn't seem to be working very well. So I really do think, in the same way alternative energy has been so important to replacing fossil fuels, I think alternative proteins are going to be an important part of the mix. And at the same time, this is something people really hate to hear, but particularly for beef, since just like Willie Sutton robbed banks because that's where the money was.
It
If you
was.
care about emissions reductions, you got to care about beef because that's where the emissions are. We're going to have to make more efficient beef. I went down to Brazil and I saw some degraded ranches where they had one cow for every 10 acres, and the cows looked like they were on hunger strikes. And then I went to upgraded ranches where there would be one cow per acre. And and again, some of the practices, they had feedlots, they were fertilizing the pastures, some stuff that Michael Pollan wouldn't like very much. But the fact is, they were using 1/10 as much of the Amazon as the degraded ranches. And, if even if cattle were only 2 times as bad as chickens rather than 10 times as bad, I mean, that would make we would eat a lot less of the earth. So I do think, you know, unfortunately, we're on track to deforest another dozen California's worth of land by 2050, and we just don't have another dozen California's worth of land to spare. So that does mean we have to work really hard on getting people to change their diets. But it also means that on the supply side, on the food production side, we're going to have to work really hard to make more food with less land and less mess.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to bring up some data though that not to suggest that what you're talking about in terms of growth of eaters and eaters. The Good Food Institute had some data. I don't know if this was on their website this past week or in something they put out, but it said close to 3/4 of consumers aged 18 to 59 are open to eating plant-based meat, according to data from the Good Food Institute. So 75%, I mean, it's an opinion, and anyone can say, yeah, I feel like I want to do
Yeah.
something better. It's not that they're doing it yet, but it's still a little bit encouraging, I think. Um,
Well, I'm open to peace on earth and goodwill towards men, um, but uh, but I'm not banking on it, you know. Um, the and so I mean, it is true that people, in surveys do express a lot of openness to flexitarianism, to
right, right.
to alternative proteins. But so far, the dogs haven't liked the food. you know and so I would say it's a little bit of good news is that in blind taste tests, particularly on the like plant-based nuggets, do just as well as chicken nuggets. I mean, again, who knows what's in a chicken nugget anyway, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right. They
and
always seem, yeah,
nuggets
they, well, I
nuggets
don't
are
eat chicken
mostly,
nuggets, but
yeah, they're mostly just like vehicles for sauce, but it shows that it can be done. And so, really, at this point, there's no real reason for anyone to eat a chicken nugget anymore. You can imagine that kind of progress being made, on the sort of more complex, you know, whole cuts of meat, but it's certainly not there yet. And I think, look, these, the original Beyond Burgers in particular, they came out. And I think people were very excited about them because they were clearly better than those old vegan hockey pucks, right?
yeah, right.
And so I think a lot of consumers were open to trying them. And you saw like Beyond Meat had the biggest IPO of the 21st century before AI, and their stock went up to $250 a share, and they were in every fast food joint. But then there wasn't better than meat. It wasn't better than the carcass burgers. And so,
I think the cost also has
and it
something to
was
do with it,
expensive too,
you
but
know.
in the taste test, like, and I've said this to the CEO who I like a lot, but I think Beyond Burgers are terrible. I think Impossible Burgers are pretty good, but neither one of them is as good as like a juicy burger, which is not like to shame them or anything. It's like an incredible technological achievement to make meat out of plants that tastes 80% as good and only costs 50% more, but it's not a business model. And so, people stopped eating them, and Beyond went from $250 a share down to $2 a share. And they got kicked out of just about every fast food restaurant that they had to deal with. And so, and I do think that sort of set the movement back a fair amount. But the hope
Yeah,
is, you know, we're as a species, we're not so great at making big sacrifices for the planet, especially when it comes to our food. But we are really great at inventing stuff. And these scientists and entrepreneurs, and I have a lot of confidence that eventually they'll get the taste better, they'll get the texture better, they'll get the price better. And they can even add omega-3s and all kind of healthy stuff to make it more attractive to health conscious consumers. And I think particularly on the cultivated meat side, lab grown meat, whatever you want to call it, they're making incredible progress
Right,
behind the
right.
scenes and getting the cost down. And that I've tried it, and that tastes exactly like meat because it's meat.
Wow, it is meat.
Yeah, exactly. It's not fake meat. So I think all of these things can help a lot. Um, it's very difficult to get humans to change their behavior. We are a very set in our ways species. Um,
I would like to jump in here and say that I think the change will come from the younger generation. And there were some surveys, and I think it might have been out of Rutgers University. I was going to check it, and then I forgot to. But and their survey was of young people, maybe ages 18 to 25 or something, probably college age mostly. And their view was very positive toward plant-based eating. And again, it's an opinion, but just having daughters and just looking at young people being more flexible. And when I've talked to people my own age, which is a lot older, there's definitely resistance. I don't try to turn anyone into a vegan,
all
even though
right.
I am one. But there's definitely resistance, people my age, just knowing that what I do is trying to get vegans out there. I think it has to do with, as you point out, people are stuck in their habits. But the younger generation, absolutely, I think that's where the opportunity will be because they aren't. Their habits are still being formed. We have a
Well,
program to teach plant-based eating in schools, and we also don't try to turn people into vegans. We just try to create awareness really about what food can do and how you can help the planet by not eating so much meat.
well, I hope you're right. I mean, look, I guess, but I don't know. I mean, you mentioned the Good Food Institute, and I talked about the founder in the book, Bruce Friedrich, who used to
Right.
work for PETA, and he used to throw blood at at models who were wearing fur, and he streaked Buckingham Palace naked with "Go Vegan" written on his chest, and
I didn't know about that
he
one.
looked like Jesus with the big scraggly beard. And after 20 years, he was also making documentaries with Paul McCartney and Alec Baldwin, sort of, showing the horrors of factory farming. But he realized like people were still eating more meat every year. It just wasn't working. And so now he shaved his beard. Now he looks like George W. Bush. He dresses like a tech bro, and he is a tech bro, right? Because he feels that it's just going to be easier to change meat than to change behaviors and to change hearts. It is just like I think it's awesome when people try. And as you like, I think schools are a great opportunity. I wrote about the New York City hospitals
Oh, right.
where
Eric Adams. Right,
they've just made plant-based meals the default. And first,
right.
they've worked really hard on making them delicious and culturally resonant, and all the other things that you want for people to like it. But just by giving people plant-based meals, unless they specifically ask for meat, they've gone from 1% vegetarian meals to 51%. So those kind of changes,
That's,
and I
yeah.
think, you schools, any institutional setting, I think there's real opportunities for that. But I also think that any, larger, strategy for how we are going to deal with this eating the earth problem that just, sort of assumes that people and even the next generation is going to kind of get their act together in a hurry. I think that kind of like sort of faith-based, and I prefer science-based, and I'm just really worried because I know people told me that that I wouldn't miss beef and lamb, especially since I'm still eating chicken and pork. But they lied to me. I still miss it. And we our ancestors started eating meat 2 million years ago, and we literally evolved to sort of enjoy the taste. Like that's when we started developing, bigger brains to find meat and smaller stomachs because we didn't have to digest as many plants. And so it is sort of part of who we are. As you know, I'm kind of pushing for it to be less of who we are, but it's very difficult, and the politics are particularly difficult, as you suggested.
Well,
I do this.
let's go there. Let
Yeah,
me ask you, let's go right there. So your reporting reveals that even well-intentioned policies like biofuel mandates can
yeah.
deepen environmental harm. If you could redesign one major US food or land use policy, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, look, I mean, certainly if you were made czar, right? You want to get the incentives right, and sort of like, particularly since beef and lamb are such baddies, you'd want to put a big tax on that, and then suddenly with chicken would look even better, right? And
Right.
plants, you could put a tax on that too, and plants would look amazing. I did quote a pollster who said that taxes on meat were the least popular policy he has ever polled. He said it was up there with veterans benefits for ISIS. So what I do think is, the kind of common theme in the sort of policies I would promote, um, and at least what's wrong with current policies, is that they really ignore the impact of land use. That's the one thing that even good climate policies right now have in common, is that they don't, and carbon markets that are supposed to be rewarding good climate behavior, they don't take land into account. So like those upgraded ranches I mentioned in Brazil, if they wanted to get money from the carbon markets, the smartest thing they could probably do is redegrade, right? And go back to having one cow for every 10 acres, because then they'd have fewer cows and fewer methane emissions, and stop fertilizing their pastures, because then they'd have fewer nitrous oxide emissions. They don't get any credit for what they're doing to spare the Amazon. The idea that what's happening on their ranch, inside their ranch, has such a big impact outside their ranch. Because when you make more food per acre, you don't need as many acres to make the same amount of food, and you don't need as much of the earth. So I guess the one, I don't like telling people that like I wrote a book about accounting, because that makes it sound boring. And you've said such nice things. I tried really hard to not write a boring book, but
No,
it's
it's
not
definitely
not
not.
about accounting, because when you account for land use, policies change. And Denmark is essentially accounting for land use. And I think it would be great if, when you account for land use, biofuels don't turn out to be a great climate solution. They're a climate disaster. When you account for land use, organic farming, is not some sort of environmental panacea. It is actually, harmful to the climate and the planet.
Right.
So it really does change the thinking when you change the assumptions. And the big assumption that I'm really fighting against in this book is the idea that land is infinite, land is free, land doesn't matter. And it matters a lot. Every acre, as they say at the end of the book, every acre really is sacred, and we're going to need to use every acre to make as much food as we can, or preserve as much nature and store as much carbon as we can. It really is. It's going to be a big challenge, but that's it's sort of a new land ethic that I'm talking about, and that's what I'd like to change.
So let's go back to consumers a little bit.
Mhm.
So many people feel overwhelmed by climate change. How does the understanding, or how does understanding the food climate connection help shift people from despair to empowerment? And do you think that's realistic to think it can happen?
I think that's a great point, right? Because this is something that you and I can do, right? Project Drawdown has listed the 100 top ways that we can reduce emissions on this planet, and basically eating less meat and wasting less food are both in the top five, and they're both things that individuals can help with. And yeah, I know it's like, your emissions are a drop in a very large bucket, but drops are what fill buckets. And so What I always say is that perfect probably isn't on the menu. I have solar panels. I drive an electric car. I actually bike most places. But I also fly way too much. So I'm not perfect. I have an impact on the planet. What I try to say is that better is better than worse.
Well, you
And
better start taking the bus.
yeah, and I'm trying to do better, and I think anybody can try to do better, and that is empowering, as you say. I do push back, I think, in a lot in the environmental and climate movement right now. There's this try to move away from individual responsibility and individual action. I think partly because environmentalists were sort of seen as scolds, right? It's like they were telling
Right.
people, don't use your plastic straws, or, it's your like we have seen the enemy and he is us. It's like they're like, no, we've seen the enemy and it's Exxon or it's Trump. But it's not Exxon that's forcing us to drive our SUVs to the mall, and it's not Trump who's forcing us to eat 3 burgers a week. And I do think, that this is a way that individuals can make a difference. And also, like, even if you don't believe individuals can make a difference, that politics is all that matter. I think this idea that climate activists are sort of saying like emissions are an emergency, emissions are a crisis, except yours. Like, I don't think that's a very compelling message. I think the idea should be that emissions really matter, and so do yours, and we're all in this together, and we should try to do a little better. And we should also push for better corporate behavior and better political behavior. Um, I understand that food is personal, food is cultural. We vote on these issues 3 times a day, and nobody likes to be told how to vote. Um, but I do think it's an area where people can feel like they're, part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Well said. Um, so you've traveled to places, and some of this you've talked about, but in a little more detail would be helpful. So you've traveled to places where ecosystems are being destroyed for cattle, soy, and palm oil. Is there a particular scene or community that has stayed with you in thinking back about those places?
Well, again, to try to make it on a slightly happier note, I mean, what really that I'm just thinking again about that, that one particular ranch in Brazil, where they were doing what I would say is really the right thing. They are very productive. They are taking care of their soil. They are taking in Brazil, ranches and farms have to preserve 2/3 of their land in forest. And they were doing that, and they were making it possible
Is
for others.
that new? I'm not aware of that.
That's
That's
that's been it's been like the last decade. Um,
that's fantastic.
yeah, no, it's great. I mean, this is again, to step back, I swear I'll get back to that ranch. But like, in the United States, we tend to, right? You mentioned beef and soy and palm oil, and it's Brazil and Indonesia, and we're like very bad. Like, this is terrible. All this deforestation. It's like easy for us to say we deforested our Amazon in the 19th century, right? I mean, Indiana used to be 85% forest. And there is no difference between a soybean grown in Indiana and a soybean grown in Brazil, right? So again, I think it's unfair to sort of blame or to suggest that what farmers in Brazil are doing is any worse than what farmers are doing anywhere else. They're feeding the world. They're meeting our demand. Now, what I will say is this rancher down in Brazil who I met, he was not like he had not read Michael Pollan. He was not an environmentalist. He was following the law, and he was trying to make as much food as possible. He was actually a big supporter of Bolsonaro, the kind of Trump of the tropics, who is, really not an environmentalist. But he also did a lot of regenerative practices. He did rotational grazing and no-till and cover crops, and he knelt down just like in a Michael Pollan book. He knelt down and took a big handful of his soil and showed it to me, and there were a couple of earthworms wriggling around in it, just like I feel like every one of these, I have a stack of regenerative agriculture books on my desk, and
Well, that's also good for profits, right?
exactly.
You know,
That's what stuck with me. The idea that, he's not doing it to be a great person. He's doing it because it's in his interest. And Brazil is at least taking steps towards making the kind of things that are helpful in his interest. And that's why we've got to get the incentives right. We've got to get the accounting right.
yeah.
Because we can't, I just don't think sort of expecting everybody, there are about 800 million farmers on the planet, and there are about 8 billion eaters. And I don't think we can just count on everybody doing the right thing for the planet out of the goodness of our hearts. We've got to make it easy for them. We've got to put the right incentives in place. And where necessary, we've got to make it the law, right? Where in the United States, farmers are basically exempt from most environmental laws. That does need to change, even though right now it feels like changing that kind of thing would be impossible. Uh, I said it before, I'll say it again. If it were easy, it would have happened already. Um, you just got to keep at it and keep fighting.
So following up on that and some other things you've said, if the United States made a collective shift toward more plant-based eating, even just cutting meat consumption in half, that would be huge. But what measurable climate or land use benefits do you think we could expect to see within 10 years?
Huh. Well, I mean, this is one of the problems, right? Like for the average person would see no benefit, right? Right now, until we basically eliminate emissions and actually start taking carbon out of the atmosphere, which is what trees do, things are going to keep getting worse. That's one of the frustrating things about climate policy. We're in the middle of this clean energy revolution with wind and solar and electric cars. But we're still pumping more fossil fuels into the atmosphere, and we still have more deforestation. And even if we reduce the rate of we're adding carbon to the atmosphere, the planet's going to keep getting hotter, which is tough, right? But and I to add to my Debbie Downerism, even if we did cut meat consumption in half in the rich world, and we cut food waste in half in the entire world, because food waste is really the other big sort of on the demand side, the other big thing we could change. We're still going to need to make more food with less land if we want to stop deforestation and and stop basically food alone from pushing us past 2 degrees Celsius. So the answer is like, right away, we're not going to see very much change. We need to do it anyway because the alternatives are real disaster.
Armageddon.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And this goes back to better is better than worse. Maybe we can like end on this, because like Paradise, California already had its Armageddon. And the what is it, Kiribati, right? Or some of those, or the Marshall Islands, some of these islands in the middle of the Pacific that are drowning from sea level rise, they're having their Armageddon. And you're
Right.
seeing these incredible rain events and wildfires.
Right.
Also, these heat waves and that are causing incredible droughts in Africa. And so like bad stuff is happening and bad stuff is coming. And basically what I'm sitting here banging my spoon on my high chair about is saying like, we need to have fewer Armageddons. Not that we'll have none, but that it's really important to try to have fewer that affect fewer people and cause less damage. So again, I think you see a lot of environmentalists, it's sort of like we need to reduce emissions 43% by 2030, or else it's game over for the climate. So the good news and the bad news is that there's no such thing as game over for the climate, right? There's only better and worse. Like 44%, it doesn't mean like, the human race goes extinct. 42%, and it doesn't mean like we're all hunky dory and there are no more climate impacts. Every bit counts. Every ton, every pound of carbon makes a difference, and we just got to try to emit less of it. And that means changing behavior and improving technology and changing our policies.
Maybe we need to get weathermen elected to representative positions and economic advisors to
Well,
everybody.
yeah, I think Cory Booker is the only vegan in Congress that I know of. And
Jamie
honestly,
Raskin, Jamie Raskin, my congressman, is he doesn't say he's vegan, but he's sort of
he's a vegetarian.
somewhere there.
He's a vegetarian. And as you know from the book, he lives next door to the main character of my
Oh,
book.
that's right. That's
And
right. I
he's
forgot about that. Yeah.
but in any case, it's
Yeah.
these I'm definitely not saying that I talk about dozens of really promising solutions in this book, but none of them have any traction, and none of them are the sorts of things where you say like, "Oh, that's easy. Why don't we just do that?" They're all going to be hard. They're all going to take work, and this is a really big problem. I wrote this book because I felt like the world wasn't grappling with it, and so my hope, after 5 years of grappling myself, is that that others will grapple.
Well, I think you've done a tremendous piece of research, and I want to go back and actually reread it because
Uh,
a lot of it I was aware of because we're in this together, right? I mean,
no, it's great
uh,
what you're doing.
it's all about meat production and land use and how that's got to change. But the fact that you wrote it and have people thinking about it, and I hope I can do a little bit to get more people to read it. We'll put this on our website as well as on the podcast platforms that we use. But I can only hope that more people will pay attention to the important message you put out there to the United States and to the world.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. And I will say, look, it's great to hear such kind words because, it's just such generous words because not everybody is happy with what I wrote. But I will say first of all that so far nobody has challenged a single fact in the book. Um, and and I will also say that people who have read the book are a lot less angry, even if they don't agree with me about everything, than the people who haven't. I think there is a little bit of it's easy to attack me as a straw man. But I really think that people like you who have dug into these issues and are really pushing, uh, you know, the world to grapple, with our diets, as well as our food production system. You're really doing a service, and I hope you can keep getting the word out.
We'll keep doing it, and maybe you'll come back and tell us how things are going down the road.
I'd
I'm
love to
gonna
do that.
I'm gonna hold up your book again so we get everybody to take a look at it because it's such an important work. So, Michael, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, I appreciate it. Keep up the good work, Jane.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Goodbye, everybody.